Hello and welcome to the employment law aspect of this training today. My name is Caroline Oliver and I'm a senior solicitor at Didlaw Solicitors. So we're going to be looking at the employment law side of things today when it comes to supporting an employee who suffered the bereavement of an infant or loss of an unborn baby. We're going to be looking at the parental bereavement regulations in terms of leave and pay rights. We're going to look at other options for taking leave, whether paid or unpaid, and we're going to look at other ways we can support employees through this very difficult period of their lives. So a few years ago, there was no statutory right to any leave or pay following the death of a child or an infant or following a stillbirth. However, research presented to government indicated that approximately 8,000 employed parents are impacted by the death of an infant or child each year. So this prompted the government to introduce new legislation in the form of the Parental Bereavement Leave Regulations, which came into effect with respect to the death of a child or stillborn on or after the 6th of April 2020. So we're going to look at the right to take leave following the death of a child or infant or stillbirth, the right in terms of pay, eligibility requirements, notification provisions, and the flexibility the employees can have in relation to this. So first of all, in terms of parental bereavement leave. So the right of an employee in Great Britain is governed here in terms of them taking 1 or 2 weeks off work following the death of a child under 18 or a baby that is stillborn after 24 weeks of pregnancy. So this falls under the parental bereavement leave regulations. In terms of eligibility, this is only available to employees. It's not available to workers or self-employed contractors or even agency workers. There's no minimum length of service requirement, so it is a day one right in terms of being employed, and it applies on the death of a child under 18, including a stillbirth after 24 weeks of pregnancy. The employee needs to qualify as a bereaved parent, so the right applies obviously to the child's parents, and that includes adoptive parents, the prospective adopter, intended parents under a surrogacy arrangement, a parent in fact, which is someone who's looking after the child and that person's home for at least the last 4 weeks, or it can apply to the person's partners, and it doesn't apply to a paid carer. So in terms of entitlement, the leave can be taken in terms of 1 week or 2 continuous weeks or 2 separate weeks. They do have to be whole weeks. And that can start on any day of the week, but it must be a whole week taken at a time. And the leave must be used at any time in the first 56 weeks after the death or stillbirth of the child. I think the reason the 56 weeks was put in place is to ensure it covers the first anniversary of the infant's or child's death. Where more than one child has died or been stillborn, the parent is entitled to take separate periods of leave in relation to each child. In terms of notification provisions, so the employee must notify the employer of the date of the death and the date they intend to start leave and whether they intend it to be 1 week or 2. But obviously this sounds a bit ridiculous if this was the immediate aftermath of a death of a child. So there really doesn't need to be any formality, obviously, in terms of how this notice is given. It doesn't need to be in writing or follow any particular prescribed sort of format. And in the first 8 weeks, the notice can be absolutely last minute, as long as it's before the day they're meant to start work. And the notice really can be given by sort of message, phone call, or anything. It may be at some point that some paperwork needs to be done, but clearly that's not always going to be relevant or appropriate on any given day. From 9 weeks after the death until the 56-week mark, the leave requires 1 week's notice. Leave can be cancelled or rearranged with those similar degree of notice as we've just mentioned. So in the first 8 weeks, pretty much no notice needs to be given. From 9 weeks onwards, it needs to be 1 week's notice in terms of changing or cancelling the leave that they require. So as I mentioned, it could be paperwork can follow, perhaps a simple form needs to be filled in when the employee returns to work or elsewhere, but obviously keep it really simple. We don't want lots of sort of red tape and bureaucracy in place here. So in terms of protection, obviously an employee in this position has all sorts of employment rights, but in terms of these regulations, they're protected from any detriment or dismissal. So in any negative treatment, really, they'll have protections and claims if they're treated negatively, if they're seeking to exercise their right to take this leave. So the employee will continue to have the right to return to the same role in a similar way to as if they're returning after maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption, or shared parental leave. So in most cases, the right is to return to exactly the same job. In terms of paternal leave of over 4 weeks, or adoption leave or shared parental leave of more than 26 weeks, or maternity leave, the right is to return either to the same job or another job no less favourable in terms of terms and conditions, seniority, job type, levels of responsibility, reporting levels, that kind of thing. Statutory parental bereavement pay. So we're looking at the pay provisions now because the rights for pay are different to the rights to take leave. The right to statutory parental bereavement pay is similar to the leave provisions, but this also depends on the individual's length of service and earnings as well. So it's more difficult to qualify to receive this pay. It's available to employees and paid office holders with at least 6 months continuous service. So they need to have been employed for 26 weeks. The rate of pay will be the same rate as per statutory paternity pay or shared parental pay. So that typically changes each year in April. And 1 or 2 week statutory pay is available. So again, you can have 1 week, 2 whole weeks, or 2 separate weeks. It's not payable in any week where the employee doesn't work for the employer. So it really does need to be in respect of a whole period of leave for a whole week. So eligibility for shared parental bereavement pay, they must be a bereaved parent as per the definition we looked at earlier. They need to have been employed, as we've just said, for a period of 26 weeks with the same employer. And they need to have still been in employment at the point the child or infant dies or the stillborn takes effect. And this is actually subject to minimal earnings requirements. So you would look at the normal weekly earnings in the 8 weeks up to the week before the child's death. And it can't be lower than the earnings limit for national insurance purposes. So very low earners may not even qualify for this. Notice provisions for shared parental bereavement pay. Notice needs to be given to the employer, specifying the week or weeks in respect of which the shared parental bereavement pay is being claimed. Again, it need not be in writing unless the employer requests it, but again, flexibility is key here and demonstrating compassion. The employee must give notice before either the start of the shared parental bereavement period or up to no more than 28 days after that period or as soon as practicable thereafter. So the notice can be retrospective in terms of indicating which week they would like to receive the pay for. There does need to be a written statement with their name, date of the child's death, a declaration that they are the bereaved parent. But again, these written notification requirements, ideally there'll be some flexibility. It'll be very straightforward. And in terms of approaching the employee to comply with those written notifications, obviously some sensitivity there would be key. So notice need not be complicated at first, quick conversation and all the rest of it, and then that sort of written notification can follow 28 days or so later. Again, the requirement to be paid for that week or two can be changed or cancelled. And statutory payments to employees for periods of family-related leave can be recovered from the employer from HMRC at the appropriate rates for that organisation, so to be reclaimed through HMRC. So that concludes the section on parental bereavement leave and pay.